Most people um, who are watching this right now have all these words floating around in their head when it comes to sharing the gospel. And if somebody were to say to you, well, what is the gospel anyway? All these words would be like flying around in your head, and you're like, okay, where do I start, right? Should I start with salvation? Should I start with God's love? Should I tell them about grace? What do I do first? And so I'm going to teach you how to organize all of these words into a perfect pattern that by the end of your drawing, you're going to have a clear picture of the gospel message. And it's not the only way, but it is a way to share the gospel. And so I have taken, probably 4 different classes on how to share the gospel. And so what I've done is designed my own picture, taking a little bit of each of those 4 classes and programs and putting it into a picture form. I actually produced a video of this and was marketing it back in the 90s. So that's available too if you want to get that video, but you really won't need to because I'm going to be sharing it all here. All right, so let's continue. Somebody else is coming. Good. All right. There's many ways to share the gospel. Probably you've all seen this little booklet, The 4 Spiritual Laws. You can do the Roman Road, and you take somebody through the scriptures in Romans. You've seen these little pamphlets with the 2 cliffs and the cross in the middle. I recently ran into a man who showed me and designed a cube that you can use to share the gospel. Recently, a friend shared this with me, the 7 R's of salvation. Let us rejoice. So you take the R's and you start with this circle and you do it this way. It starts with rejoicing in the truth, and then you start with talking about a relationship with God. It's ruined by Satan. You rely on yourself. There's rebellion. Then you realize there's a void. All these R's that you see in this presentation are going to show up in the drawing that I'm going to teach you how to draw. So at the end of this class today, I'm going to give you some homework assignments. And you're going to be doing, probably maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day of homework at the end of this. And it's going to help you nail down this pattern in your own mind. So whenever you're on a plane, in a restaurant, sitting down with a friend, anytime, anywhere, you can share. Before we start, some of you may have seen this, but I want to read this. It's called The Fellowship of the Unashamed. And it goes like this. I am part of the fellowship of the unashamed. The die has been cast. I have stepped over the line. The decision has been made. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I won't look back, let up, slow down, back away, or be still. My past is redeemed. My presence makes sense. And my future is secure. I'm finished and done with low living, sight walking, small planning, smooth knees, colorless dreams, chintzy giving, and dwarfed goals. I no longer need preeminence, prosperity, position, promotions, plaudits, or popularity. I love all those P's. You're going to be learning that in the picture that you draw. I now live by his presence, lean by faith, love by patience, lift by prayer, and labor by power. Boy, I love all those L words too, don't you? Live in his presence, lean on his faith, love in his patience, lift by prayer, labor by power. My pace is set, my gait is fast. My goal is heaven. My road is narrow. My way is rough. My companions few. my guide reliable, my mission clear. I cannot be bought, compromised, deterred, lured away, turned back, deluded, or delayed. I will not flinch in the face of sacrifice, hesitate in the presence of adversity, negotiate at the table of the enemy, ponder at the pool of popularity, or meander in the maze of mediocrity. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I must go until heaven returns, give until I drop, preach until all know, and work until he comes. And when he comes to get his own, he will have no problem recognizing me. My colors will be clear. That makes me want to cry. I am not ashamed of the gospel. Romans 1:16. Boy, we can start there, right? So you all are now, you've crossed the line, you've signed up for a class, and now you're going to be accountable for what you learn. Isn't that exciting? And it gives you joy because you say, oh my gosh, as I invest in this and I start working on a gospel presentation message every day, you know God is going to send somebody into your life where you're going to be able to use this. So I'm going to send you this in a handout, and you can sign it and date it and stick it in your Bible. And remember that it was this date that God began to use you in a new and exciting way. I love this picture. God's heart has room for everyone. And so you don't know where God is going to lead you, who he's going to lead you to, or when. It could be a plumber that comes to your house. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a guy come to haul away a bunch of junk for me in a truck. And I was about to share the gospel with him, and he said, oh, no, I just accepted the gospel yesterday. I accepted Jesus. I picked up some junk from this pastor's house, and he led me to Christ. Look, I have my Bible he gave me. It's in my truck. I was just like shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. So you don't know when God is going to call you to present the gospel to somebody. And it's an exciting life. You can wake up every day and say, Lord, use me today. And if you start your day like that in an expectation, believe me, your eyes are more alert and more open to actually being used. So let me share this with you. Sharing the good news is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. You just let it loose and it defends itself. And so that's what we're going to be learning, is how to share the gospel and the good news. Once you let it out, the Holy Spirit does all the work. So we'll talk about the different types of soil. We'll talk about who's ready, how to know if someone's ready, and to know what stage they're at in their readiness. So that's something that we'll be talking about also today. So how about others' awareness? How aware are you? I think there's 4 types of people. Some Christians are overfed. You know, they've attended 1 million Bible studies and they have all the knowledge, but they don't do anything with that knowledge. They just enjoy their, what they call the holy huddle of my church. But they really never learn how to share it with others. And so I call them these overfed, kind of sluggish lions. And then there's these little babies here that are indifferent and unaware that there's a whole kingdom out there of lost people. And they're immature Christians. They're just learning themselves. So that's okay. They're in a different place. And then you have these baby Christians who want to grow up and want to imitate their father and want to imitate Jesus. And then you have those that get to the point in their maturity when they're really focused and they start their day like this lion. I love it. It's like waking up and being on a hunt to find those who are ready to receive the good news. And so this is how I want to live my life, like this, ready to go in full stride and eyes wide open. And so that's my prayer for all of us today. So let's talk about where people are in their journey, their Christian journey. This is called the Engel scale, and it's the steps that most people go through in learning to follow Christ. So down here, number 1, you have somebody who has no awareness of God whatsoever. This might be the atheist or the person that was never raised in a home where God was ever talked about. There were no Bibles, whatever. And then they go through these steps. Some awareness of God. Maybe they have some Christian friends, but they're not interested in the gospel. Maybe they have an interest in Jesus, and now and then they may go with you to an event at church. Then they start saying, well, that wasn't so bad. I met some really nice people. And maybe they're on step 5. Step 6, they start to listen to you. They start opening up. They start asking questions. And then as you share with them, they begin to understand more and more truths about Jesus. And then at some point, they accept the Christian truth. They accept becoming a Christian, and they decide to surrender their lives to Jesus. Then they gain confidence as they begin to grow and attend Bible studies. Their lives begin to change. They have a basic foundational truth, and then they join Bible studies, they grow, and at some point, they begin this desire to want to share with other people. So some of you today might be anywhere from step 9 through 16 here. And so all of us want to get to the point where we're sharing our faith with others. So this is the stairway to maturity, if you will. So when you meet people, just know that they're all in different places, and then it's up to you to decide where are they in this Engel scale. And if you can review this a few times in your mind, you'll be able to better discern where they might be. So that's important to be aware of that. Some people look at evangelism as just a gift that perhaps is there for only a few people. Let me just say right away, all the gifts are given to the church to be shared and taught with other believers and the world. So remember, Paul said, I want you to desire all the gifts. So I desire to have the gift of mercy. My innate gift, one of them is evangelism, yes, but I also want the gift of mercy. I want the gift of helps. I want the gift of administration. And I try to model my life after those who have that gift. I even ask them to share, well, how do you administer your gifts? And give me some ideas. I love how you interact with people. Teach me. I want to be more like you. And I have a brother who has the gift of mercy. And I model my life after my brother's gift of mercy. And I think, okay, what would my brother Howard do? And so I try to model his behavior. So when people say evangelism isn't my gift, so I don't share, I leave it to the evangelists. To me, I think it's a misunderstanding of what evangelism is, because we're all to desire all the gifts and to ask God to help us grow in those gifts. And I know Paul desires all to have, he said, I desire that all of you had the gift of prophecy. What is a prophet? A prophet speaks on behalf of God. So when people say, oh, I don't have that gift, well, really, an evangelist is somebody who speaks for God. So it's like a prophetic gift as well as an evangelistic gift when you really look at its true definition. Here is the word prophet in Hebrew, nava. Navia or Nava means to speak on God's behalf. So sometimes people think a prophet is somebody who can predict the future, but it really just means I'm speaking on behalf of God. So if you're a follower of Jesus and you're speaking on his behalf, you have prophecy when you speak about Jesus. You're prophetically speaking about the Messiah. And so I want all of us to see ourselves functioning in these gifts. And don't right away say to yourself, oh, I don't have the gift of prophecy, or I don't have the gift of tongues or evangelism or mercy or whatever, but say, Lord, help me to grow in my gifting in all areas. That's my own personal belief. And I say, Lord, use me to teach others in the body of Christ how to be evangelists. That's my role. And that's what we're doing here today. So I wonder sometimes if people, it's a cop-out where people say, oh, that's not my gift. Because honestly, evangelism, I think, is out of all the gifts, is one of the scariest, right? Nod your head. We've all been there where you've been asked to share and you're like, nope, uh-oh, here we go, Lord, help me. But really, it is the gift that I think is the most intimidating. And the one where sometimes we feel like we have the most to lose, perhaps friends, family members. Perhaps we're seen in a light that isn't always great. So I hope to change your thinking about that by the end of these 6 weeks. So Jesus commanded his own disciples, and he said, go into all the world and what? Make disciples. Now, you can't make a disciple without them first knowing Jesus. So if that's the commandment to make a disciple, then it's also a privilege to be the one that actually leads somebody to Christ. And that is the end goal for everyone we pray for, right? And we're going to be talking about our roles, and different times the roles change as Christians. So we'll be talking about that in a minute. I want to show you this word command in Hebrew. It's zavah. And a mitzvah, if you put an M on the front of this, if you've taken my Hebrew class, you know this. The means by which you do a command is a mitzvah, and it's a good deed. So a mitzvah in Hebrew thinking is a good deed you're doing for somebody else. So I wanted you to see how when Jesus commands us to do something, he's commanding us to do a good deed, and it's a military term. And that means zavah is army also in Hebrew. Isn't that good? So when Jesus gives us a command, you need to think of yourself as being in a military, God's army. And if you're in God's army and he commands something, what do we do if we're true soldiers? If your commander gives a duty, what do? They salute, they click their heels together, and they say, yes, sir, right away. And boom, they go do it, right? So I have learned over time that the speed at which you respond to God's command is a direct reflection of your expectations of the outcome. Rapid response. That's why I put this here. You're part of God's rapid response team. When I worked in the hospital, in the ICU, and then in the end of my career, I worked in cardiac rehab. We were in a separate building from the hospital. And so whenever we had an emergency, we would call the rapid response team at the hospital, and they'd send everybody running with all the equipment, and the defibrillator, the crash cart, everything would be run across the street from Tri-City to the wellness exercise place. And their hearts were beating the whole time. And by the time they got there, honestly, I don't care whether they were a doctor or a nurse, or if they'd been doing it for 50 years, everyone's hearts were pounding. Everyone's hands were trembling. And it's just something I've observed over time, that no matter how experienced someone is, and when it's an emergency situation and you're asked to respond, there is a level of intense anxiety. And I have to admit it, even myself. And I always just pray, Lord, you use me right now. Lord, give me the words. I never go into any situation totally confident in myself. So just so you know, you're always going to have a little bit of anxiety and fear anytime you share. And even the street evangelist, Ray Comfort, I don't know if you've watched him online, but if you haven't, jot his name down, Ray Comfort, and go to YouTube and watch him, how he interacts with people on the street. I did go through his evangelism program, and I have all his materials, and I have used some of his materials in my own presentation of the gospel message. So what I've done personally is, over time, look at different programs and then take snippets from each different program, and like you have a toolkit, and you're saying, oh, I like that. And you grab that tool and you stick it in your toolkit. So I look at evangelism as like us walking around as professional people that can fix things. And you have a kit, and it's a toolkit. And some days you use a hammer. Some days you have to get out your tweezers and delicately go through. Some days you got to get out a screwdriver and unscrew thoughts that are not of the Lord in somebody's mind and heart. And you have to handle objections or complications or mistruths or lies that they've been told. So each time, each person, God is going to call on you to use a different tool in your toolkit. So my desire is to continue after this class, each of you to go through different programs and then use different tools at different times. So I've used a few of Ray Comfort's tools since I took his class, and it was really awesome. It's an online class you can take. So what is evangelism anyway? The Greek term is euangelion, sorry. And it means to preach or proclaim the gospel. I've heard Christians say, well, I just don't want to sound preachy. And I'm like, no. Remember when your parents, when you were little and they told you a great story? You were like all in. And if you tell a story correctly with passion and enthusiasm, the listener will respond in the same way. It's like this. If I was going to share the gospel with you and I said something like, you don't really want to hear this story, do you? It's kind of long and boring, but if you want, I can share it. You know, I think that's the way some Christians go about evangelism. You know, they're like, oh, well, okay. Well, yeah, maybe I'll just invite you to church and let somebody else, you know, share the good news. And if you act unenthused, then they're going to be unenthused. So whenever I share, I'm aware of my face. I'm aware of my tone of voice. I'm aware of my level of enthusiasm. And so I've learned over time to really use my whole body when I'm sharing and be aware of my own passion for Jesus to affect other people. So I just share that right now to say, you're not sounding preachy if you're sharing the story and with passion and a true desire for that person's salvation. So good news, look at this. Sharing the good news. Look at this word good news in Hebrew. It's exciting. It's called a besara. And so when you give somebody a besara, you're giving them good news. I had a man come and fix my roof, and he was Jewish. And I said, I have some good news. And he said, oh, you have a Besserah for me. And at the time, I hadn't studied Hebrew, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And he explained that Besserah is good news. Did you know that basar in Hebrew, here it is, basar, means to gladden with good tidings? It means a reward for good tidings. But look at this. It also means flesh. Now think about this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became what? Flesh. So the Word, Jesus, became the good news. So see, when he became flesh, he was the good tidings, the good news. So when we're sharing the good news, we're sharing Jesus come in the flesh. And this is a beautiful word. And you might want to tuck this somewhere in your presentation and say, did you know that good news actually means flesh? And Jesus came in the flesh to show us who God is and what he's like. So this is just a beautiful word to stick into your little toolkit when you're sharing the gospel and you want to share a little bit of Hebrew with them. So remember the fattened calf in the prodigal story? What did the father say when the son returned? He said, go get the fattened calf. Bring me the meat, the flesh, and we'll celebrate. So it's like you see that same thing. In that culture, they brought meat whenever they were celebrating. They brought flesh, and it's tied to a celebration. So when Jesus becomes flesh and somebody receives him, it's a celebration. Let's look at Luke 15 about celebrating. And this is how Jesus, who was very Jewish, shared with other people the good news, a reward of good tidings whenever you shared the good news. Look at these parables in Luke 15. Jesus shared 3 parables in Luke 15. And whenever I share the gospel, when I'm all done, this is where I take them. I take them to Luke 15. Put this in your notes somewhere, and when we do our presentation, and you know and you've learned your entire presentation, this is where you're going to take them at the end when they received Christ. You're going to take them to Luke 15. And you're going to talk about how the angels in heaven are rejoicing over their one person who comes to know Jesus. Look at this parable and notice the words that appear in all 3 of these parables: lost, searched for, found, gathered neighbors together for a celebration. This is the heart of God. So he tells this parable of the woman with the lost coin. What woman, if she has 10 drachma and loses one, okay, there's lost, won't light a lamp, sweep the house, and search, there's the word search, all over until what? She's found them. And then she what? Calls all her neighbors to celebrate. And then what? They celebrate with her. So when you share the gospel with somebody, I always end with Luke 15 because it's a celebration. And if you're not excited that they've just found Christ, they're not going to be that excited. So this is my favorite part. You should see the tears roll down people's face when you take them to Luke 15 at the end. And you say, do you realize right now that there's angels in heaven rejoicing before the throne of God over you? And they're just like, they can't believe it. And you take them to this scripture. Look, an angel in Hebrew, look at this definition. An angel in Hebrew is called a malach. Those of you who've taken my Hebrew class, here's the word. Mem, lamed, aleph, kaf, what? Sofit. Okay, I see some of you smiling because you've taken my class. Okay, so an angel is a messenger or a malach. Look at how it shares 3 letters. See these blue letters? And these 3 letters? These 3 letters is the word for a king or a ruler. So an angel is a messenger who relates to a kingdom. So if you are an evangelist, you're an angel or a messenger for the king. See how beautiful these words are? These are called cognate words in Hebrew. They share 3 of the same or 2 of the same letters. So I want to show you how being an angel or a messenger is related to the kingdom and the king. And so I want you to see yourself as a messenger of the king, because that's who you are in Hebrew thinking. Look at the only difference between these 2 words is this aleph right here. This letter in its ancient picture was that of an ox, and it was a picture of strength. So isn't it interesting that that's the letter that's tucked into a messenger, is the letter of strength? So when you go in Jesus' power to share the gospel, I want you to remember that this little aleph is going with you, so to speak, in the strength and power of God's Holy Spirit. Isn't that beautiful? When you look at that, you're like, oh yeah, I remember God is with me, and I'm going in his strength to share the gospel message, because I am what? His messenger. So see yourself like that when you're thinking about going into all the world and sharing the good news. So let's talk about what does a godly, balanced believer look like? First of all of us have 3 things in Greek thinking. All of us have character, compassion, and content. It's called the 3-legged stool in evangelism. So on this 3-legged stool is what we stand. So look, if we have ethos, we're ethical. That means as Christians, we're to have character. So when we're sharing with friends, it's not enough to just share the gospel. We have to have a life that demonstrates the character of Christ. So a question we ask ourselves, do I have the character of a Christian? Do I have the character of somebody who another person wants to emulate? Am I being a good representative to people around me? And then the second one is pathos. It gets the word empathy from pathos. Do I have a heart of compassion for the lost? Do I have a heart of compassion for my family who doesn't know you, my neighbors, my friends? And then third, and why you're all here today, I know all of you probably have these 2 already, but many of us lack content when it comes to being logical in how we share the gospel. So this logia, logic, is putting something together in content that makes sense. And that's why it's important for Christians to have a plan in place where we can share and make sense to other people when we're sharing. And that's why I developed this picture that you're going to learn to draw, because I said, okay, Lord, I'm living the life. I have a compassion for the lost, but I just want to be more confident when I share my content. And so my desire is to help you to do that. So let's talk about the 3 concepts of sharing the gospel, and then we're going to take a little break here in a few minutes. I've been talking now for almost 45 minutes, so we're almost ready for my break. We're going to take a short 5-minute break, so let me finish this last slide or 2. So Jesus used agricultural concepts when talking about his kingdom. And you all know, cultivate, sowing, and reaping. But let me show you what these concepts are appealing to when you're sharing. If you're in the cultivating phase, you're appealing to the person's heart. I put the things that you're appealing to in blue. So when you cultivate, you're cultivating a relationship of trust and credibility with somebody. So you're being a good neighbor. You're being a good friend. You're taking a meal to a new mother who's got a small baby. You're welcoming a new neighbor. For example, I read a book called Friendly Persuasion, and it said, a chapter, it said, can you bake a cherry pie? So I had a neighbor move in across the street the day I finished reading, Can You Bake a Cherry Pie? So a neighbor moved in, and I thought, well, I can't bake a cherry pie, but I could make her a dish of lasagna. So I made lasagna, I took it over to her, and did you know she was Italian? I was like, oh my gosh, Lord. And she goes, well, how did you know I was Italian? Well, she ended up receiving Christ. She has been through my Torah class. She's been through the Hebrew class. She's been a Christian now 15 years. All her kids are Christian. All her kids are in ministry. One's a counselor. One's a pastor. This is all because you go, oh, Lord, okay, I can bake a cherry pie. So right now, I have a person that just moved in 2 doors down, and I told my husband yesterday, oh my gosh, I got to go take them something. So this is the cultivating phase. This is, we all do this, right? Okay, how about sowing? When you sow, you're appealing to the person's logic and you're appealing to their intellect. And this is where we need to know the truth when we share with somebody. And we have to have it organized in such a way that it makes sense. And that's the whole purpose of learning this drawing is, Lord, I know how to cultivate. I know some truth, and I do the best I can when I share. But gosh, Lord, I would love to be in this phase as well. I would like to have all 3 of these. Reaping appeals to the will of the person. So when I'm sharing, I always have these 3 things in mind. Not just this, but I want to close the deal. I want to be the one who asks for a commitment. And that's where some people drop the ball. They do this, and then they kind of say, well, maybe you can come to church with me sometime. And like the baby's crowning, the woman's in labor, and the head is right there. I'm like, no, don't walk away. Help the baby be birthed. It's right there, crowning. So think about that when you're sharing and learning this picture, that you're to desire all 3. I want to cultivate, I want to sow with God's truth. And then, oh Lord, if it be your will, let me help this person come to know you right here, right now, this day. And by drawing this picture, it brings you to this point. In the drawing, you'll always end right here. And that's the exciting part, is that you never leave this out, because in the picture, you always end up asking for a commitment. And that's the thrill right there. And so that's where I'm going today. I always say it's like this. You may be asked to be just a link in the chain of somebody's journey to the cross, but don't be that missing link. At some point, you may be cultivating, sowing, cultivating, and then that person is ripe and ready. And you go, oh my gosh, Lord, I get to be the hook today. Yay! This is where you want to try to get. I'm satisfied with this, but my goal and my greatest joy and my desire is to get to the hook. And if you learn this drawing, you'll end up many times right here. Not every time, but many times. So I'll end with this slide and then we'll break. Here's the 5 P's in sharing. Have a purpose, and you're to actively seek and save. Have a plan. God's truth is to be demonstrated by our behavior, but also what? Declared with truth. Here's where I think some Christians cop out. They say, oh, well, I don't have to share the gospel. I just demonstrate it by my life. Well, yes, you can do that. but it's like singing a song without the words. They're drawn to the melody. They like the melody, but they're like, gosh, I wish somebody would tell me the words. And then be prepared. Have some sort of organized thought on how you want to share. And then practice. Make the message clear. And then pray. Pray for courage, for contacts, and to have good content when you share. So let's take a 5-minute break now. And we'll come back. I'm going to unmute everybody now and go back to my screen and unmute you and see if anybody has any comments or questions. How do you cancel the muting? Let's see.
We can unmute ourselves.
Oh,
I think
goody.
we just unmute ourselves.
Perfect, perfect. All right. So anybody comments, questions? I'm just going to sit here because I have my coffee. I'm not going anywhere and I don't have to go to the restroom.
I do.
It's very good, Rebecca, because it's something we all do. I mean, I always tell people and I always try to do those things, but to put them in a, like you need a plan for everything. And sometimes we think we don't need a plan, like we can just go because we know what we're trying to achieve. So this is really, really good.
Yeah.
I'm going to send it to a lot of people that feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I know, weren't you in sales, Victoria? Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. The feedback I've gotten from people who are in sales is that they say this is exactly what you learn in a sales presentation. You have to know your material. You have to know what their objections are ahead of time. You have to know all of the resistance you're going to get at every turn and know how to meet the resistance with the right comeback, right?
Right.
Really, I mean, I don't look at people like a sales project, but if you have the passion for the lost and you want to see your friends and family come to know Christ, if you have a plan in place, believe me, you'll be more confident to share.
That's what I was just going to say. You will be more confident because you have the next step. Mm-hmm.
And you will share more and you'll be excited to do it instead of scared.
Yeah.
And holding back. Because anybody will let you draw them a picture. I have never had one person tell me no, they don't want me to draw them the picture. I've had different responses from the drawing of the picture, which is fine, but I've never had anyone say, no, I don't want to see the picture. So once you learn how to draw this picture, you'll be ready to draw it at a drop of a hat. And part of your homework will be practicing drawing this in stages. And we'll go over that at the end today. And what I'm going to do is do like a presentation that I would do for each of the 5 sections that you're going to learn. And then you modify it, make it your own, put it in your own words. I don't care. But the good news is this will be recorded so that, you can practice it along with the recording. Just play the areas where I'm sharing, and then you practice, and pretty soon it'll be second nature. When my mom lived with me, I taught her in 1 hour how to draw the picture, and she could repeat it back. Now, she was a strong Christian, but she said, oh, this is really amazing. I've never had it in any kind of order. I just kind of like hit and miss.
Order. Yeah, that's the key, order.
Mm-hmm. And so my mother's an artist, and she plays the piano, and she does oil painting. So everything she does is patterns and order. Mm-hmm. And she said, this is the first time anybody's ever showed me the pattern and the order so that it's so clearly understood. And she was 98 when I taught her. Yeah. So anyone can learn to draw this, is my point. I've taught it to my children when they were teenagers. They could both draw it. I taught it to my neighbor, Lynn, that I took the lasagna to, and she can now draw it. And so I'm excited for all of you to learn to draw this. Any other comments?
As a former teacher, you always have an objective and you have a lesson plan. You cannot get to independent practice until you go through those steps. And sometimes you have to go back and reteach because the student might not understand. But you have to have a designated plan. And you also have to teach foundational skills. So if you don't know foundation yourself, then that's why it's so important to study the word and be practiced, like you say. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
As a teacher, I'm sure that you can relate to that.
Very much so. And most people are visual learners. So when you draw pictures, they can relate. Most people are not auditory learners, especially in our culture today.
Right.
So you need a representation. So every time I would do a presentation with my kids, I would try to teach them mnemonics through pictures or even singing, because then you get that mental picture in your mind when you sing, and it comes back so easily.
Yes. What grade level did you teach?
I primarily taught second grade.
Oh, perfect.
It was my favorite. Yeah. I taught so many songs. I was in an art school, and so we did dance, music, visual art. Drama is really important to act out something as well.
Yes. Well, I can see by your face that you have what I call a yes face.
Oh, really?
Yeah. See, when you have that excitement and joy in your own face, then it's going to be felt by those that are facing you. And so I always say people either have a yes face or a no face. And so I always try to have a yes face when I'm out in public, because when I teach evangelism, I always say your very first thing in evangelism is eye contact and a smile.
Yes.
And so I'm very aware when I'm out in public, am I getting everyone I meet eye contact and a smile? That's the first thing that opens a door, because if you're friendly, it offers a doorway open for further conversation. But if you're walking around into, grumbling and looking around at your purse, and I go out every day and go, Lord, who's in Stater Brothers today? Lord, who at my gym today? Lord, and it may not even be sharing the gospel. I'm just saying you might have a spiritual conversation. We're going to talk about how to start a spiritual conversation in the last part of this class today. So let's take one more minute, and then we'll go back and we'll learn how to start a spiritual conversation. And you can do it on a plane, you can do it in a supermarket, you can do it anywhere. And that will be part of your homework this week. And so let me go back, and let me just scroll through people here and see if people are back yet. Karen's not back. I have 3 or 4 people still missing, so I'll wait just one more minute. Any other comments or anything anybody wants to share about your own personal experience sharing?
I noticed, I like how the Hebrew word for angel, which is messenger, is melech or malach, and then the Hebrew word for king is Zadok, or the high priest is Zadok. So when you think of Melchizedek, who Abraham paid tithes to, and you break down the word, he's the messenger of the king. Yeah, isn't that good? And I just love when you do those comparisons. It matches each and every time. Yeah. So every time, I think of the Melchizedek, and they're like, oh, who is they mispronounce like Melchizedek. You hear it all. You break it down. It's a messenger of the high priest. That is so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That is, we know him as Melchizedek, but if you break it down into the Hebrew like you just did, you can see the connections, right? Right. So he was paying tithes to the great, representation of the great priests, and he was in Jerusalem before we knew Jerusalem being Jerusalem. So I just love it. Yay. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Hey, which reminds me, you guys, if you haven't taken my Hebrew class, it's now online.
on YouTube under Sparky's Torah Time. So you can begin with, it's a 6-week class learning your basic Hebrew, and it's all recorded now, and you can go take it on your own in your own time. You just go to Sparky's Torah Time on YouTube and go to the video that says Hooked on Hebrew Week 1, and you can go through all of the material online. And then if you want me to email you any of the PowerPoints, some people like to print them out, put them in a notebook so they can kind of, some people like to have, paper where they can write on and scribble and make notes and stuff. So if you want to do the Hooked on Hebrew class online, feel free to email me. You have my email, rjlevis@gmail.com, and you can, I'll be happy to send you those PowerPoints so you can print them out. So that's available now. And so that's good because everybody who's taken the class can then go back and review it. So that's awesome. Okay, let's get back to work because it is work, right? It is work. We're working for the King. All right. So we've already talked about that. All right. So how do you begin a spiritual conversation? The goal of every conversation is to try to direct it towards the spiritual. Now, I'm not talking about always having spiritual conversations. That's not what I mean. I try to be, human as well, and just, hey, how's your kids and how's your family, blah, blah, blah. But here's what is called the fire acrostic. And this is how to initiate and direct the conversation towards a spiritual conversation using this acrostic. F stands for friends and family. So let's say I'm sitting on a plane and I start inquiring about their friends and family. Then I go to the I of fire and I say, well, what do you like to do when you're not running after your kids or blah, blah, blah. So now I'm talking about what are they interested in? And many times, if you can find out what their interests are, you can find a little bit more information about that person. In other words, you'll start getting a feel for their personality, what interests them. Is he an engineer, salesman who loves a bunch of details? Or am I speaking to a really sweet little mother who is more heart-oriented? And so maybe I'm gonna start appealing to her heart more than her head. Because remember, we're appealing to 3 things: the heart, the head, and the will. So by going through somebody's interests and finding out about their families, you're getting a feel for who they are, which will affect how I present my picture. Then the third thing is, what is their religious background? So I try to bring something into the conversation about myself that has some religious conversation. In other words, I might say something like this: I'm on a plane, we've already talked about all of this, and I might say, oh yeah, I love to garden too. It always reminds me of, like Jesus told a lot of parables using agriculture. So whenever I'm gardening, I always, and then so I throw out some bait. I call it spiritual bait, kind of. You're trying to feel around. Is there any response when I talk about religious things? What is their response? Do they cringe when I bring up anything about Jesus or the church? Pay attention at this point to the person's response. When I bring up something about my faith or my religion or whatever, it'll give you your first clue of how open that person is. So I look for ways to bring in, let's say, let me give you another scenario. A new person moves in 2 houses down. I say, oh, where are you from? Oh, do you have kids? Oh, where did you live before here? Okay, so now I want to say something to my neighbor like this. Okay, so you're new to this area. So like, do you need to know where, the supermarket is? Do you get your nails or hair done? I can refer you to someplace, or maybe a church. Okay, So I've thrown in church because I want to throw out some religious bait to get a feel how open they are to religious things. So I always include to a new neighbor, gosh, do you want me to show you where you can get your hair done, your nails done? Do you have a good church you go to? I always ask that, because this many times will open up a door for spiritual conversation. And before you know it, she's saying things like, well, I used to go to church as a child. I was raised Catholic. But I left the church long ago because I felt it was full of hypocrites. Have you ever heard that one? Okay. So where do you go from there? I go to my picture. I say things like this. I'd say, you know what? I answered the exact same way you did at one time. But then someone drew me a picture that really opened my eyes, and I'll never forget this picture. I'd love to draw it for you sometime. Maybe not right now, but maybe another time when we're together. Would you like me to draw you that picture? It's pretty amazing. It changed my life. And maybe she'll say yes, maybe she'll say no. But do you see how simple that is? I always start here. I try to bring in something to see if they're open. And I try to ask if I can draw the picture. And then before I do that, I ask them two important questions, and they're called exploratory questions. And you're going to learn these questions next. I learned these questions when I went through Evangelism Explosion, when I was at Assembly of God down in Mission Valley. I'll tell you my story briefly. It's pretty funny. I've always thought of myself as an evangelist, but I never had a real program and plan. So my heart started pounding when they announced, we're going to have an evangelism class. My heart started pounding, and I said, I've got to get in that. So I went in with fear and trepidation. We were going to learn a presentation and then go out into the community and knock on doors and go to the malls and walk the malls and get ready to share the gospel. When I heard that my first night of class, I almost didn't go back. I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to do what? And right away I was ready to bolt out the back door. But I just felt like the Lord kept saying, Rebecca, this is your next step in maturity. So I have to laugh at myself. Being a little bit vain, I thought, okay, if I go out in the malls, I'm going to look really good. So I got earrings on and high heels, and I put a suit on, and I wanted to really look good because I didn't want to appear, one of those boring Christians that people, oh, here she comes, no makeup, she looks terrible. Yep, you're one of those. So here I am, doing my song and dance at the mall with my high heels and my earrings, and my leader, who was this plain, kind of overweight woman. I laughed because I thought, Lord, I know why you put me with this woman, because I think I'm all about me and she's all about you. And I could see it so plainly my first day out that I had to laugh at myself. I got home that night and I thought, I'm not going back. This was awful. And I get a phone call from this woman. And I'm sitting in my kitchen. It's about 10 o'clock at night. And she calls me and she says, Rebecca, I know you love Jesus, and I can see your heart of passion. She started really sweet like that. And I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. And then she said, but can I just share one thing with you? A little less of Rebecca and more of God's word. I just put my head down on the table and started bawling. It was like right on. It is not about us. We all know that, but somehow, sometimes our eyes are on ourselves. And I just really had to learn the hard way that, yes, you're going to go out with some anxiety. It's not always easy, but it's not about you, Rebecca. It's about you letting the Holy Spirit use you. So I always laugh at myself, my first attempts of evangelism, because I went about it all wrong. And you know what? The next week I went out in tennis shoes and blue jeans, and I led 3 people to the Lord that night. So I went prepared, but also with the right heart attitude. And the Lord blessed me because he could see that I got it. I said, okay, Lord, I'm sorry. It's not about me. Forgive me. So that's my first experience. So when you're out with somebody, you're thinking fire acrostic, friends and interests, throw in some religious activity to see where they are and what their response is. And then if there's an open door and they're open and they're allowing you to draw a picture for them, first, I'm going to ask them these 2 questions. And here's what you're going to ask them. You're going to memorize these questions. There's 7 steps that I'm going to take you through to share. And today you're just going to go through the first 3. Okay? So here's the 2 questions. Here's how I do it. If they say, yes, draw me the picture. So pretend like I'm at this new person's home. She just moved in. We started a spiritual conversation. I've asked her if I can draw her a picture that changed my life. And she says, yes, I'd love for you to draw that picture. Then I'd say this, well, you know, before I draw it for you, let me ask you a couple questions that someone asked me that really made me stop and think. Let me ask them to you before I draw. And then that person always says, okay. And here's what you say. If you were to die today, do you know for sure that you'd go to heaven? And usually what they say is one of 3 things. Well, I hope I will. Or number 2, yeah, I think I will. Or number 3, oh, absolutely, I've been a Catholic, or I've been a believer. I believed in Jesus my whole life. So you'll get one of those 3 responses. And so then you say, oh, that's so funny. I answered the same way to those questions. I always identify with the person. So I'm going to ask her 2 questions, and then I'm going to identify with whatever her response is. So if she says, yeah, I think I'm a good person, I'd say this, number 2. You know, I answered those same questions the same way like you did when they asked them to me. Or if you want to be really honest, you can say, well, most people answer those questions just like you did. So what you want her to see is that you're identifying with her, that she's no different than anyone else. We all come, you know, level before the foot of the cross. We're all in the same boat. We're all fallen people. We think we're good people. We try to be good people. But what does God say? So when you draw the picture, what you're going to do is however they answered here, by drawing the picture, by the time you get to the end, they'll see that these 2 answers, or however they answered, was the wrong answer. But unless you draw the picture, you're not going to know where to go after you have these kind of conversations. You're gonna fumble and stumble and go, oh, well, you know, it's important to know Jesus because Jesus died for you and blah, 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 blah. And then what if they say, yeah, but I'm already a spiritual person? You're like, oops, now where do I go? See, you're going to have all these, what I call rabbit trails. And so my personal experience is you eliminate a lot of the rabbit trails by drawing the picture. And then it keeps you on track as you're sharing because you have a goal. You're drawing a specific picture with a specific endpoint. And that's the reason I draw this picture every time I share, because then I don't get confused. I don't get taken on rabbit trails. And suddenly we're off the gospel message. So by drawing the picture, it keeps you on track and it keeps them on track and it makes sense and it's logical. So then after I've asked the first question and they answer, I say, well, let me ask you the second question that someone asked me. I answered similar to you with the first one. If you were to die and stand before God and he should ask you, and then I use their name, let's say my new neighbor is Nancy. I'd say, Nancy, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say, Nancy? So see, by using the person's name, you've now made it really personal for her. So when I ask these two questions, I include the person's name in the second question. Okay, you just met a guy named Bill at a party that you're there with your husband. You ask him this question and he says, yeah, I'm a pretty good person. And then I get to question 2 and I kind of laugh and say, well, you know what? I answered that same way. But then they asked me a second question. Let me ask it to you and tell me how you would answer this, Bill. And then I'd ask him this question. So if you did die today, let's say you left this party tonight and got hit by a car, and suddenly you find yourself standing before God, and he should say, why should I let you in, Bill? What would you say? I'm curious. You know, and you try to make it fun. You're not making it like, all right, how, do you know Jesus? And make it real boring. When I'm asking these questions, I try to make it as natural and unintimidating and threatening as I can. And then I just ask permission to draw the picture. And see, no, I haven't accused him of anything. I didn't say, well, you shouldn't believe that. And now we're talking about what it means to be spiritual or some other crazy conversation. But I'm trying to get them to sit down with me and let me draw them the picture. That's my goal. So fire acrostic, bring up a spiritual concept to see if they're open. And then 3, try to get to the asking if you can draw a picture. And before you draw the picture, you're going to ask them 2 questions. So that's where we're going. And when you're asked to draw the picture, you might say something like this. I answered these questions very similar to you. But then somebody sat me down and drew me a picture that really changed my life. I've never forgotten it. As a matter of fact, I still have that picture today. Can I draw it for you? Now, that's not threatening in any way. I've never had anybody say no. And then I leave the rest to the Lord. If they're open, by the time I get to the end of the story, if they say, well, yes, I want that. And then they're ready to go. They're ready to pray with you. If they say, well, you know what? Gosh, nobody's ever explained it to me like that. But I can see this is a huge decision. Let me think about it. And I say, okay, here, take this picture with you. And if you're ever ready to say that prayer, you can say it by yourself, or I'd be more than honored to pray that prayer with you. Okay, you can end it any way you'd like. But let me just say, when I drew this picture for an employee of my husband's, we were at a party, and I asked him if I could meet him for coffee another time. It wasn't the time to do it at the party. So we met for coffee, and he was a runner like me, so we went for a run together. And then I said, let's go get some coffee. So we're sitting down, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to get drawing this picture for him. So I asked him these questions. He answered just like I said people answer. I asked him if I could draw the picture. He let me draw it. He was enthusiastic. I shared the whole thing. He had tears in his eyes. By the time I finished, he said, wow, Rebecca, I can see that this really takes a lifetime commitment. I don't know if I can do it. I said, no, that's the point. You can't do it. I said, but you do need God's power. And then I'll show you how to bring that in the picture. And then at the end, he just said, I need time to think about it. And I said, oh, Joe, that's really good. You do need it. It's a huge decision. And so I said, why don't you come to church with Michael and I Sunday? He says, I'd really like that. Do you know, he came to church with us for a year. And one day when they made an altar call, it was at Assembly of God down in Mission Valley. The pastor made an altar call, and Joe turned to me and he said, would you go down to the altar with me? I'm ready. So I got to go forward with him a year later, but I had asked him the 2 questions. I had drawn the picture, but it wasn't the right time. So it may be right then, it may be later, it may be a year later. I have lots of stories like that. So don't be discouraged if after you've learned this and you draw the picture and that person says no. It's okay. You've done what God has called you to do, and then you let the Holy Spirit do all the rest. How does that sound? So here's the picture. What you're going to be learning for next week's class is this section 1 and section 2. Just this. And you're going to practice drawing this first and memorizing what all these things mean. And if you do it every day by Friday, I'm going to ask you to find a friend or a family member, sit them down and ask them if they'll role play with you. And you're going to say, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then I'm going to ask you if I can draw you section 1 and section 2. And then at the end of that, I want them to be able to grade you on how understandable your presentation was. Now, the first time you do it, you're going to stumble all over the place. Just know that. The second time you share it, you're going to remember a little bit more. The third time you share it, you're going to have it down. The fourth time you share it, you're going to be confident. But it takes practice learning these steps. So I had to commit to learning these things. And so that you have to be willing to do the same. And I'm going to show you how I would present these if I was sharing them before we leave today. Remember, Jesus said, follow me and I will make you. He's going to help you become fishers of men. So let me ask you a question. Can you call yourself a fisherman if you've never gone fishing and you've never caught a fish? So wouldn't you like to learn how to be a fisherman? Yes, we would, Rebecca. All right, here's what you're going to do. I'm going to send you this assignment, and you're going to print out 4 of them. You're going to print out one for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Each day, you're going to list the 4 things in the fire acrostic. You're going to write down the 2 exploratory questions, and you're going to practice drawing part 1 and 2 of the gospel message. And when you're done, I want you to grade yourself on a 1 to 10. How did you do? Did you forget half of it so you'd give yourself a 5 out of 10? I forgot all of it except I only drew the circle. Okay, so maybe I'll give myself a 1 or a 2. But you're going to see over 6 weeks as you do this, by the time you get to the end of the 6 weeks, you should have a 10 in here. Okay, so that's my goal for you. You don't learn anything unless you do it over and over and over, right? You have to practice this every day. So let's go back and let me practice this with you. So if you're telling a story and you start in the middle of a story by saying you need Jesus, he died on the cross for you, and this is where you start, you're coming in the middle of the story. So I always take them back to the very beginning. I take them back and I start in the garden. And I start with the story of Adam and Eve. And I say, let me start at the beginning. See, in the beginning, God had a plan. So here's the word plan at the top of this. God had a plan, and I tell them in your own words what the plan was. He had made Adam and Eve, he put them in a garden, he set 2 trees in the garden, and one was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and one was the tree of life. He wanted a relationship with Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve were made up of 3 things: the spirit, the soul, and the body. God's spirit dwelt with Adam and Eve in the garden. They had free will, they had freedom, they had dignity. They had responsibilities and restrictions in the garden. They were responsible to keep and till the garden, right? But they also had restrictions. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for the day you eat of it, you will die. Now, Adam and Eve, we know what happened. Here's the problem. They ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Adam and Eve that day both died spiritually. And so you draw this circle again, but instead of spirit, you put the word void. Does that make sense? So you've shown them that all mankind from Adam and Eve on are born void of the spirit. They have a soul. The soul is made up of, think of the smile acrostic. Think of the word smile. S-M-I-L. Whoops, I did it wrong. Okay, S-M-I, where's the L? Let me get my glasses on. I took my glasses off. Okay.
It's a W there.
It's a W, but where's my L? What does this stand for? Okay, maybe it's not smile. Maybe it's a different word. Forget that. Here's the 5 words you're trying to memorize, and maybe you'll come up with your own acrostic in your own way. But the soul of a person is made up of 5 things: his senses, his will, his intellect, his mind, and his emotions. This is the soul of a person. So they all have a body, they have a soul, but they're void of God's spirit. The day they ate of this tree, they died. And so everyone from Adam and Eve on are born void of the spirit. Every man feels this void, and they don't know what it is. Would you all agree? Right? They try to fill the void with these 5 things. Look at it. Possessions, pride. Oh, if I just was the president of my company, I'd be happy. Prestige. Oh, if I could just be principal instead of just a teacher. Power. Oh, if I could be the president of the company. Or people. Oh, if I just had more friends, I'd be happy. Or if I just could date somebody that was really handsome, then I'd be happy. So people try to fill this void with these things. And you can put anything you want in here. You can make it your own. You can come up with your own things that people try to fill this void with. You might come up with all M words like money, masterful living, whatever. I just came up with P words. So these 10 things you memorize. It's not hard. I just say people's soul is senses, your mind, will, intellect, and emotion. And so people try to relate to God using these 5 things. This is how all man tries to relate to God. And they try to fill this void with these things, but they're never satisfied. So the day that they died spiritually, God called them sinners. And so you have a cliff here, and the day they died, they were separated from God, because sin separates you from God. At the end, I'm going to give you scriptures that go with these, and you can quote them or not quote them. I've quoted them and not quote them, and people still get the message, but I'm going to give you some scriptures at the end that you can use in this drawing when you're sharing. And the Holy Spirit will just give you words to say. He'll give you certain scriptures. They'll come to mind as you're sharing. So right here, I would share Isaiah 59:2, where I say, see, the moment that you ate from that tree, your sin separated you from God. And that's why you feel this void here. You feel it. And you're trying to fill it with things from this earth that'll never satisfy you. So this is the story. What you've learned is God had a plan. Here's what he was planning for them. But here's what the problem was. They ate of the wrong tree. They listened to a different voice. They died spiritually. And now they're trying to relate to God using their senses, will, intellect, mind, or emotions. And really, this is religion right here. These 5 things are how God tries to relate, or people relate to God through these 5 things. And really, if you look at these, think of any religion right now. Think of Buddhists, think of Greek Orthodox, think of Catholic, think of, I jokingly, my husband's Greek, we jokingly call sometimes the Church of the Bells and Smells. You know, they got lots of incense and bells and stuff like that. But it's that man is trying to use all of his senses to relate to a spirit. You see why that doesn't work? You can go to church your entire life and appeal to your will, your intellect, your mind, emotions, and senses, and still be void of God's Holy Spirit. That's what born again means. And we're going to get to that as you learn more of this drawing. But if you can learn the original plan and where everybody went wrong, you're going to leave behind a lot of objections when you're sharing. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay. This is where all of us at one time lived. We went to church maybe. We knew about God. We had what they call an intellectual faith. I know all about God. Yes, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I believe in God. I always say to them, well, the devil believes in God. So how is that salvation? Just believing facts are not the answer. You must be regenerated. See, that's the difference. This is what they're missing right here, this void. And they're trying to relate to a spiritual God using the flesh. And the flesh is right here, our senses, will, intellect, mind, and emotion. And then I say to that person, maybe I'll put her name here. If I'm talking to somebody named Nancy, I'll put Nancy's name here and I'll say, Nancy, can you relate to this? Do you see yourself here, maybe your whole life going to church and really feeling this void? So at this point, I'm going to try to relate to that person. And at this point, they usually say, yes, I can relate to this. This was me my whole life. I went to Catholic church, but I never got anything out of it. Right? These are where most people are. And unless you get to this point and say what the original plan was and how they lost the spirit when they sinned, and now they're separated from God, and that's the void they're feeling, they'll go, well, so now what do I do? Oh, well, do you know that God provided a way for you to not be separated anymore? And then you're going to go into this part. Does this make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't care how you tell the story. I want it to be your story. And I want you to practice telling the story just as you draw this. So here's my suggestion. Don't try to explain it first. Just learn to draw it first. Once you've memorized the drawing, then you start working on, okay, now how do I tell the story? Does that make sense? Okay, so next week, you're going to have 4 handouts, and you're going to draw the fire acrostic, the 2 questions, draw part 1 and 2 in the space below. You're going to have 4 of these sheets, and by Friday, I'm going to hand you a Friday sheet, and the Friday sheet is going to look like this. You're going to do the same thing again, write the questions, but now you're going to role play with somebody. Get your kid or get your husband or get a good friend and say, hey, I'm going to role play with you. I'm taking an evangelism class, and I pretend like you're just a nice, good church-going person. And let's say we're having a conversation, and I say to you, do you want to go to church with me sometime? And then have your role play person say to you, I don't need to go to church. I'm already spiritual. And then what do? Okay? It's all yours now. And now you're gonna go through this, and you're gonna grade yourself at the end, and you're gonna draw the picture, ask them the 2 questions, and see how you did by Friday. And grade yourself. Be honest. At the end of the 6 weeks, you're gonna keep all these, and you're gonna mail them to me. You're gonna mail me all the days each week, and I'm going to look at how you've graded yourself and how your drawing progresses from day 1, week 1, to by the time you get to week 6, you should have 10s right here. Okay? So if you don't have a goal, you're not going to do this. You're going to just wait for next week's class, and you're going to sit home and do nothing. So this is the first time I've made people actually do these things, because that's the only way you're honestly going to learn and get this down. So I think this is really fun, and I can't wait to see your drawings. Yay! So that's it for Ebony. I feel like Porky Pig now saying, that's it, folks. So everybody, unmute yourself.
Okay, here.
Unmute yourself. I want to hear people's feedback.
Rebecca, can I ask you, if you get into the question, where do you, if you think, are you going to go to heaven? What if they say, well, I don't believe in heaven.
Yeah.
I don't believe in God.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a point where you just say, okay, fine, you know, we don't go any further?
Yeah, good question. Hi, Mary Jane. I see you. Okay, so here's how I usually respond. I usually say, oh, really? Well, everybody worships and serves something or someone. So if you don't worship and serve God, then maybe you're serving yourself. What do you think of that? And the person will say, well, you're right. And I'll say, okay, so let's pretend there is one, and let's pretend you are open. Would you mind if I shared a picture with you to show you that maybe you have a misunderstanding about what it means to know God? So, see, I'm trying to probe and see, would that person be willing to let me draw him a picture? So I might ask him a few questions like, well, I was talking to somebody else who didn't believe in God also. And then they allowed me to draw him this picture, and at least it made him consider that there might be a God. And maybe that's the only thing that you were meant to draw them at that time, is just that picture. And maybe somebody will come along later when they're more open and say the same thing.
Okay.
So we'll practice as we get.
Rebecca, are we only supposed to do the first two? Rebecca, are we only supposed to do 1 and 2? What drawing? Yeah, 1 and 2. That's it. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You're only drawing column 1 and column 2, and then practicing explaining it yourself. And you can do it.
It's so weird. It's so weird because I took the class before, but I didn't remember hardly any of it. It's so freaking weird. I mean,
You know why?
You
know why, Mary Jane?
Why?
Because
Why?
I didn't give you homework every week, did I?
No. No.
Okay, there you go. Thank
Yeah.
you. She was not a plant, by the way, everybody else.
I was not. I was not a plant.
Okay, so that's my point. Nobody's going to actually do this unless you hold them accountable. And
You're
so
right.
they have got to practice every day and then turn it into me, or they're not going to do it.
Okay.
So believe me, this time you will remember, Mary Jane, because you're going to do homework every week.
Now, can I ask you, you said to print out 4 sheets of that. Is that what it said? Print out 4?
Yes, and then then send you the Friday's handout, and you'll actually be drawing it for someone.
Okay, so the handout, what I'm asking you is are the handouts at the end of your session and then I can print it?
What I'm going to do along with the PowerPoint is send you those in a just as a PDF, and you can print them out.
Oh, that'd be easy. Okay, that's easier. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
So glad.
Nancy Oates, you're muted, honey. Unmute yourself.
My dog was barking, so I muted it. Is it possible for you to send the PowerPoint before? Because I was trying to print them out, like take a screenshot and print them as we were going to put notes on it, because, so I didn't know if you had them set ahead enough time that you could send them to us before the lesson so we could print them out.
Well, when I do it in class, they have the printout of the PowerPoint in front of them, so they can make notes in PowerPoint.
That's why I wouldn't do that. Can I just tell you why I wouldn't do that?
Sure.
Because what happens is if she handed it out to us with, are you talking about the whole thing?
Yeah,
Or just
like a,
see, the whole thing would be too much, and then I would be looking, and I have to concentrate on 1 and 2. So maybe, does that make sense?
no, I mean like before the lesson.
Oh,
You know, so like if we had the PowerPoints that you would normally hand out when we're in live class,
okay.
while you're going through it, then we could
Okay,
take
I get it.
on them as we're going through.
Can I make a suggestion? Let me just make a suggestion to make it really easy for you guys.
Uh-huh.
When I usually have anywhere from 15 to 22 slides. Just get a notebook and just put 1 through 30. Okay. Just
Well, that's kind of what I've been doing, but
It's a-
I'm more visual when I put it with the slide. To
right,
me, it makes more sense.
right. But that's the other option. It's just okay. Slide 1. This was my question or my thought, or this is what I want to remember. And then later, if you want to print them out and put them in a notebook,
Then make the notes, transfer the notes, maybe.
I can send them to you in.
What I do like, can I tell you what I do like about not having that? Is
What?
because I had to write it out. I had to write it out, which is, we didn't have to do that before. So what I did, instead of just looking at your handout, which would be plan, promise, provision, whatever, proof, I had to actually write it out. And to me, now I see it better because I had to write it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
Some
me,
people are
well, yeah. See, I'm kind of missing because I'm trying to write my notes, and
Yeah.
then I'm missing what you're saying at the
Yeah.
moment.
Me too.
And so I think we all learn different ways.
You're
you know,
right.
like,
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
Let me
So I just, yeah.
comment. Let me comment, everybody.
Okay.
Just for a minute. For those of you that have a Mac, I can send you the PowerPoints in a printout form. There's 3 slides to a page with ability to take notes. That's what I do whenever I have a class live. Everybody has the printout with the slide and the place to take notes. I can send you that if you have a Macintosh. If you don't have the Keynote, which is the program I use on Macintosh, if you don't have Keynote, I can't do that. You'd have to print out just each big slide, and that's a lot of ink over 6 weeks. So that's why I'm not sending them out. If you have a Mac, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, because I thought with our other class for the, you know, the Hebrew, we're sending them out. No?
Not in advance, you didn't.
Not in advance, but I mean, I thought you sent them out after.
So here's the good news. This is all recorded. So if you say, oh, I was writing and I forgot what she said, you can always go back and re-listen to it and take notes again. And unfortunately, in this format, unless you have a Mac, you'd have to print out each slide, and that would be very, very costly.
Okay, I have a question about the questioning. What if someone said, you mentioned, you know, somebody who said, well, I'm a spiritual person, you know, I don't need, and maybe they would reject the fact that there's a void here. And so when somebody says, oh, I'm spiritual, it's like, what do you say? It's not the Spirit of God, or what?
Well, I would say, you know, we all like to think we're spiritual because we do spiritual things. And then I use sometimes the analogy, just because I park in a garage doesn't make me a car. You know, just because I do spiritual things and I think spiritual thoughts, do I really have a spirit, or is it just my soul? And then maybe at that point I would explain more about their concept of being spiritual is wrapped up in their humanness. and that God is outside of creation. He's not a part of creation. He is the creator. So see, they're jumbling it all in as if God and his spirit is part of the humanness. So I always say we're separate from the creator. The creator is here and we're the created. So, I'll just say something like that and just see what they say. And sometimes I never get to the drawing because they're just closed. And next week we're going to talk about the 4 soils and how to progress. Hello, hi Grace. When we go over the 4 soils, you'll know more about how to progress with a person based on where they are. So that'll be helpful, Eloise, after we go over the soils.
Yeah, good. I like that. Okay, it's part of your humanness and your own thinking. Okay.
Right. Any other questions? This is good because you guys think of things that I, haven't thought to add maybe today, but we have 6 weeks together and we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but boy, at the end of this 6 weeks, you're going to know how to draw the gospel. Isn't that exciting?
And I'm still here. My camera just died.
That's okay, I can hear you.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Well, I really identified with when you got to, the problem of being, maybe going to church and religion and relying, thinking of religion in the dogma, basically, and not feeling it in the soul.
Yeah.
I mean, that really happened to me. So it was very powerful to maybe put that in my story at that point, because that really.
Right. How many people spend their whole childhood and adults in church and they walk out feeling empty.
Yeah.
And they don't understand what it means to be regenerated. I will be talking about what regeneration means. And Eloise, when you talk about that person who thought they were spiritual, I would also at that point share with them what it means to be regenerated. And we're going to be talking about that in another class.
I was thinking about that being a spiritual person. Would that be the difference be that like you may be seeking spirituality, but you don't have the Spirit of God in you?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
See, it's what they call an intellectual belief. In other words, it's coming from here. It's not a transformed heart. And so I can think I'm spiritual, but how is that affecting my heart? Has it changed me? Does it give me the power to live differently? And if they've been going on the same track their whole life thinking they're spiritual, but their life is a mess, it's only when they're empowered through the Spirit. So maybe at that point, that person needs to hear more about what it means to be regenerated by the power of God's Spirit. So you'll learn, after you learn the basics and people start making comments, you'll say, oh, they have a misunderstanding about that part of the drawing. Oh, they need more.
And you might want to ask them what spiritualism means to them. I'm spiritual. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So Jesus knew that they were without the Spirit and he was willing to die. By the way, I was thinking this week, I am going to post on Facebook a picture of Jesus hanging on the cross. And it's going to say, all lives matter to him. And then at the bottom, it's going to say, I can't breathe.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I had posted one too that was similar, and it said, Jesus died for all lives matter, It's just.
And how did he die? He couldn't breathe.
Right.
Think about that.
Yeah.
That's the crucifixion, is they're not able to lift themselves up and get that breath. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what the world see. So anyway, I'm going to do that either today or
Yeah.
So that's it for today, folks. And We've gone way over time, a half an hour, but that's because we started late and we had a lot of questions and explaining. But next week we should be out right at 11, and I'll look forward to seeing you all then. Do your homework and practice, and don't throw those papers away because you're going to mail them to me. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
God
you very
bless
much.
you. Have a great week.
Thank you,
You
Rebecca.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.